Hey everyone, Julien here, nurse practitioner for Danesthetics Medical, and today we are talking to Ario Khoshbin, who is the CEO and founder of Prollenium, which are the makers of Revanesse dermal fillers. And the reason why we're doing that is because I'm a filler guy, and this is the only Canadian product on the market, and it's become one of the staples that I use. All of my Patreon members definitely know how much I use this product. And it's definitely like a staple tool in my arsenal. So what we're going to do is just bring on Ario right now. And I'm hoping you guys are going to learn a lot from this, because we're going to be talking about why I like it, the safety aspect of it, how I use it in certain areas of the face. Because I know that there's a lot of different products, and in the States they may have one or two, but here we have a variety. And we're also maybe going to dive into what's coming up into the near future. So let's bring him on. Hey YouTube, before we jump into the video, make sure you check out my Patreon account. It's designed for serious medical aesthetics providers just like you. There we go.
Hey, I'm here.
So the reason why we're bringing on Ario today is because he's the CEO, he's the founder of Prollenium, and they make Revanesse dermal fillers. And it's the only Canadian dermal filler on the market. I don't even know if there's actually another North American dermal filler on the market, but I know it's definitely the only Canadian one. And the reason why that's a big deal is because internationally, whenever people find out that anything that Canada supplies or makes or accepts and approves, it's a big deal. And the reason why is because our health, our safety standards are extremely high, extremely regulated. So now that we have this up, it's just been a buzz in the market. And anytime I go to any international conference, people are like, oh, you've got the Revanesse, you've got like the Versa. I'm like, well, we have a couple different names here, but we are lucky that we get to use everything that you guys have in the lineup so far. So before we get into that, I want to know a little about your story about, man, how did this happen? How did you create a filler company?
Well, I mean, listen, first of all, thank you for having me. This is, it's an honor to be on your show. I know that you have a lot of people tuning in on this, so hopefully I won't mess it up, but I really appreciate you having me. It's kind of a crazy story. People ask me about it all the time, and honestly, if I was to try and recreate it or do it again, I don't even think I could. It was just very serendipitous the way everything happened. I think for all the young entrepreneurs out there, there's always a time and place for things. And I think sometimes you can kind of stumble upon something and get really lucky. But all of us, whether we're in the filler business or any other business, we're always standing on other people's shoulders to get to where we are. And in my case, I was very fortunate I was blessed with two really wonderful parents that were always doing different businesses and different things. And I was actually really lucky that my mom had started a med spa when I was in my late teens. And my mom, she's both my parents are very entrepreneurial, but my mom in particular, she wanted to get into this space. She had one room, and my dad's a naturopath. So she had one room, my dad's clinic, and kind of grew it from just being a nail and massage spa to a full aesthetic med spa. And that's when I kind of started working for her, and I had my first taste of the aesthetic industry, and I really started learning about it. But if it wasn't for her and the experience that I got there, at a very basic level, I would never be where I am now. So all the credit goes to my parents for supporting me and allowing me to be where I am.
Amazing. Listen, Let's talk a little bit about what makes the product unique, because there's a lot of safety regulations with Canada. There's a lot of red tape you've got to go through, and what I've noticed whenever I'm using this product is that there's nothing in the future that's going to happen that's a secret or surprise. I don't get any additional inflammation. What I inject is whenever they leave, that's what they get. There's nothing that I have to let them know, say, by the way, you're going to have a bunch of inflammation that's going to, or swelling that's going to happen for like 5 days or 2 weeks or anything like that. It's basically, this is the result. You will have a little bit of inflammation from the needle areas that I've poked, but not from the filler. So, come back in 2 weeks, and if there's any little minor tweaks that we have to do, it's great. But it's always minor because it's usually just the inflammation from the poking. So what makes it unique that this product does that consistently?
Well, I mean, there was a time that I actually, when I first started with fillers, that I had a very bad filler when I first started. And that was in 2004. I was actually probably the third product to get approved in Canada in terms of AHA dermal filler. It was Restylane, Juvederm, and at the time, the product that I had was called hyaluronic. The strange thing about it was we didn't know a lot about fillers at that time. It was kind of the wild, wild west. You had all kinds of products coming out. You had polyacrylamide products, silicone. People were injecting everything. And people didn't really understand that the whole purpose of the skin is to keep things out of your body. It's got a really defensive mechanism, and our immune system reacts to what goes into the skin. It's like the first line of defense. So when I first started, the first product that we started selling, we were seeing these really delayed inflammatory reactions with it. And patients would get the filler, and then 2 weeks later, sometimes 6 months later, there'd be some sort of an immune event where they'd get sick. And all of a sudden, all of the areas where they had the filler injected, they would swell up. And I was having that issue for months, and I could not understand it or figure it out because we weren't actually manufacturing the product ourselves. We were using a contract manufacturer at the time. So that is really what led me to start looking at what causes fillers to react. And it's what started our whole journey into R&D and manufacturing our own product. If we hadn't had that experience, that negative experience, I don't really think we'd be doing what we're doing now. So I always thank God for that. Sometimes you don't really know where your blessings come from, but in that circumstance, we were given an opportunity to improve on our product. And again, we kind of started from the bottom and started reverse engineering every product that's on the market. For a lot of people that don't know about the industry, most of the products that are on the market now, they're rooted in two companies. One of them is obviously Corneal and Juvederm. Many of the products on the market are really copycats of that product. Or they had a scientist that worked there that left and started another company. So they're very similar. We didn't have that benefit when we started. We really had to start from scratch. So we went out and literally reverse engineered every product and tried to figure out why ours was causing problems and other products weren't. And what we learned was that the more natural you can make these products, the less you're going to have issues with inflammation and immune reactions. So the key with these is to manufacture a product that can really hide in plain sight. One of the big problems is that companies try to over cross-link their gels for a variety of reasons, one of them being duration and the other being that they don't want them to take on as much water. So to make the product more predictable, they end up cross-linking more. But what ends up happening is you can actually get issues as the immune system sees the gel and doesn't recognize what it is and can actually attack it.
What I really like about it is, like you said, you have various different types of brands. And for people who don't know out there, hyaluronic acid is, we produce our own hyaluronic acid, and you can have uncross-linked and you can have cross-linked. And the cross-linking is basically how you're kind of holding this gel into place. And there's various types. There's some that have double cross-linking to help it last longer. And then there's some that have Nasha technology, IPN technology, all these different types of technologies that basically make their products somewhat unique, and at the same time they pitch it based on longevity, more pliability, duration, all these things. What I found really unique is like the sphere. It's low inflammatory because it's the spheres are larger particle size. They're not small particle size. And typically the more I read into this and the more research I do, I find that anything that's small particle size is definitely high risk of pro-inflammatory. And also that every sphere is pretty much identical. So how did you guys create this?
A lot of people try to complicate the technologies around these products, but they really come down to a few factors. And one of them is the degree of cross-linking. So that's how much you cross-link the HA. How many of the chains do you link together, what degree? The other factor is how big the particles are, because again, products that are wet milled, with the exception of Restylane, which is completely different technology, but all the products that are wet milled, it's really like making a big tub of Jello. And then you're taking the tub of Jello and you have to cut it up into a million little pieces so that it would be able to be squeezed out of a syringe. So all companies are cross-linking. This is where we differ. We cross-link differently, which means there's different degrees. The particle shapes and sizes are different between the companies. And another really, really important factor that a lot of people overlook is the degree of non-cross-linked hyaluronic acid. So for a long time, companies thought that non-cross-linked HA didn't really do anything and it went away after a couple of days, but it actually does far more than we know. And I'm still learning about it now, and we're still seeing the effects of it. One of the things that it actually does is it can immediately draw a lot of water to the implant if you have a very high degree of linear HA, non-cross-linked HA. So with those factors, companies do all those steps differently, but what we believed from when we saw very early on was that in order to have a product that is less immunogenic, you want the particles to be as round as possible. You know, there's also a sweet spot for the size of the particle, right? You don't want to be, you're kind of in between 200 to 400 micron on all of our products. The other thing that's a very important thing is the size distribution of the particles. So we try to stay as consistent as possible on the size of the particles. So some companies, you'll find when we were looking at the technologies, we see there's particles anywhere from 400, 500 to 100 microns in size. The reason that's not a good thing is because you get a very uneven degradation of the particles. So the smaller particles will actually get eaten up first, and the larger particles will take longer. So if you want a gel that's even and homogeneous, you want to make sure that the particles are all similar in size. So those are the factors. I mean, if you cross-link a product too much, what you're going to see is you're going to see either nodules where you get your immune system putting a big capsule around the filler. And if you don't cross-link it enough, you're actually going to get a situation where the product goes away pretty quickly. So there's kind of a sweet spot for it.
Yeah, and everyone's trying to figure out, you know, what's the ideal, what's the reason why people are having complications, and if it's like 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, or maybe 2 or 3 weeks down the road. And sometimes the discussion is, well, maybe it's because there's too much cross-linking, and sometimes they'll say, well, maybe it's because it was a dirty needle, or it wasn't disinfected properly, or who knows. But what I know is that obviously you need to have clean technique, but the product, it's not necessarily if there's too much cross-linking. What I see, if it's uniform, then the body's going to basically accept it a little easier. And if you have 150 microns, 500 microns, if you're looking underneath the microscope, you see it's all kind of like mashed up, then that means the body's going to have to figure this thing out, and it's going to either reject it or accept it. And most of the time, these dermal fillers, which are great, what's nice about Health Canada is that they're extremely regulated. And for the most part, your body does a good job of accepting it. But what I'm noticing with this product is that I'm really not getting any issues with it. It's very consistent. And as I said, like what you see is what you get. And you guys have made a very good product.
I appreciate that. Honestly, I mean, it was born out of our experience with a product that was causing a ton of problems. And I remember when we started, it was actually a doctor in San Diego that told me that he was from South Africa, but he was injecting it in his clinic in South Africa. And he was telling me that the only way to get rid of these types of reactions was prednisone. And that's kind of when I keyed in, because at the beginning we thought, okay, maybe antibiotics, like, is this injection technique related? It wasn't sterile, but you know, I think it's very difficult to inject your patients and have an issue with an infection. From what I've seen, it very rarely happens.
Well, thank you so much, man. All right, this has been great. Honestly, I remember hearing your speech, and for anyone else who hasn't been to one of Ario's speeches, if he's ever at a conference, I highly recommend going, because he goes much more in detail with regards to the hardships he had to endure when he was younger, what his mother had to endure, and how his journey started. And it was super inspiring, and what he's done for the community is amazing. I'm loving your product, man, and I can't wait to see what happens for the future.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate everybody for tuning in. It was a lot of fun, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much.